Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Mystery Theory podcast. Today, I'm going to share the podcast on a Monday because I kind of messed up my dates for recording, and you probably will hear my zoo in the background, but I didn't want to miss Monday's upload. So expect your Monday video on Wednesday, and then Friday, as always, on YouTube. If you're new around here, welcome. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and I encourage you to listen to the collection of other podcasts that I have here. I also, if you're on YouTube, I encourage you to like this video so we can share it with more people. If you're not subscribed on YouTube, please consider doing so. And if you're listening in your favorite podcast app, thank you so much. If you feel like you want to leave a review, it helps a lot. So again, thank you. Now, today it's a very interesting case, and it's based on a case itself, but it's surrounding a new theory and a new device that is used, and most of us who own this device, to track information. Now, this is not a conspiracy theory. This is proved information, and I want to share it with you because I don't know if you are aware of the power that these devices have over us. I'm not talking about TVs that record people or Alexa recording your conversations and sending it to relevant people in your conversation. This is more personal. This is a device that actually tracks if you're dead or alive, that knows if you are struggling, if you're sleeping. And really, I've heard people say that, this is kind of invading my personal space, or is tracking information and sharing it with the government, and it's unconstitutional and it's not okay. And the purpose of this device is not what it's used for by the authorities or even the government. But who would buy a device that is going to keep track of what you're doing? Nobody would do that, right? So they share the idea of tracking your activity, but it can be used as a human black box. So we will talk about this case, but first I want to touch a little bit on what device I'm talking about. And I want you, if you're on YouTube, to comment if you have this device. I can say I have it and I love it. It makes me feel accomplished. Whenever I'm feeling down and like I didn't do anything with my life, I look at this device at the end of the day, I'm like, goodness gracious, I actually did a lot. So, what is this human black box that I've been trying to share with you? Well, first, let's talk about what is a black box. Most of you know, I told you there's a zoo in the background. Please ignore it. A black box, again, you probably know what it is. But if you don't, I'm going to read you a little bit the description of what it does, so you can compare it to the device that we're talking about today. Black boxes are normally referred to by aviation experts as electronic flight data recorders. The role is to keep detailed track of on-flight information, recording all flight data such as altitude, position, and speed, as well as all pilot conversations. It's a little naughty, I would say. I would compare it with the part of the brain that we have for memories. Basically, this records everything that happens in the plane and stores it very safely. So even when there's accidents or, it's the black box is one of the things that will survive, and that we can look into it and say, oh, this was human error, or they ran out of fuel, or, that kind of thing. But some people are calling a Fitbit an outside human black box. And I read this article and it made so much sense in my head that I thought I had to share it in the podcast, because you guys know I've shared how a serial killer most likely look like what their face, physical appearance, their brains, and it's all part of a mystery in my brain that it's been making clicks everywhere, and each day some of those mysteries are stopped. They're not a mystery anymore after seeing so many cases, and I'll do a podcast about that too. But in this particular case, this human black box, it's a Fitbit. And Fitbit is a company that makes a range of fitness bands, smartwatches, and accessories that you can use to track your steps, exercise, heart rate, weight, and more. Now, I have one myself, as I mentioned, and I love it. It's super old. It was my husband's. I think it was one of the first ones out there. It's kind of big and not modern looking, but I love it. It makes me feel accomplished. It makes me feel like I'm in some kind of control, or that something else is keeping track of what I can't or what I won't keep track in my head. Now, the company Fitbit was founded sometime in the year 2007, but between the year 2010 and 2019, their sales rose from 60,000 to 16 million. So today, in 2020, chances are that some crime victims or even suspects are in fact wearing one of these watches. And they are being very useful in criminal investigations. For example, I'll give you a more detailed example, but I don't know if you remember about Connie Dabate, who was shot 2 days before Christmas in the year 2015. Her husband, Richard, told the police that an intruder had entered their home just after 9 a.m. and tied him up before killing his wife. Very convenient. Why didn't they kill him? Well, he didn't explain that part. But when they checked her Fitbit, it was a completely different story, because she was actually alive and at her house for an extra hour. So she was actually alive up until 10 a.m. When the police checked, there was no forced entry or signs of struggle. So the investigation focused on the device's information, and there was this part of the article I was reading that was explaining how much faster it is to get information from Fitbit than to get a DNA sample. It's way, way faster. Or to test a DNA sample, I should say. So, eventually they had more than enough to arrest Richard and charge him with murder. I mean, it doesn't have to prove that you did it. It only has to prove that you're lying, and the police can take it from there. Is this even legal, though? This device that is tracking information, is it okay that they're, snooping in your private information? Well, in most cases, for victims, they were already dead. So we can assume that they'll be okay with the idea of knowing who murdered them. But how about the criminals? And how about future investigations? Well, there's completely different things coming, one from Amazon and the other one from FitBit. Amazon has drawn a clear line. Without the permission of the user, the company will not hand over the recordings made by its smart speakers. But FitBit lets users know in their website we may preserve or disclose information about you to legal comply with the law, regulation, legal process, or governmental request. So basically they're saying from the get-go, if we're asked for that information, we will share it with this, group of people, including the government, which I don't know. I can't think of why the government would want to know how my heart rate is. But I guess if I was involved in some kind of investigation, they would be able to share my information. But is it perfect? What if the battery dies? Or if it stops sending information? I mean, does that mean that they are dead? Not really. So it's not perfect. And it has a bunch of data, but it's not all of it is reliable. And so we can conclude that this is not, at least not yet, a bodily black box, how some people call it, which I thought it was kind of weird. Because if you think about it, and listen, I'm not saying it's not. I'm saying that there's a few limitations that we have to share too. They're not actually tracking behavior, right? But they were tracking motion. So the police in an investigation, it's basically interpreting motion. And they even have a margin of error counting your steps. I mean, they're not perfect. Sometimes if your arm is resting, I read this example. It was on a stroller, like if you're taking a walk with your baby and you kind of rest your arm on the stroller. And even if you're walking, sometimes it's not counting the steps. And that's for newer, versions and some older versions. I know mine make mistakes. Sometimes I am not walking and I'll see how, and it's weird because it turns on the light and it kind of shows that it's having some kind of a problem. So they're not perfect, but they're able to precisely say if your heart is beating or not. This is only information that when you take it to a judge, the judge will use it or not. So they will decide what to do with this information. So how can this be used as a human black box? Let's talk about Anthony Aiello. You may know who the guy is because this is a very bizarre story. But Anthony Aiello was described as a kind person. His life was also described as very boring. This guy was lucky enough to live in his house for 50 years. And he was at this time 80 years old. And he met this wonderful lady, Karen Navarra. While they were in line at the Save Mart meat counter, he asked her out to go have some coffee. And he ended up buying 2 dozen roses. And soon enough, they were in love. I would say you can find the love of your life over a meat counter at Save Mart. I mean, goodness, it was meant to be, I guess. Adele was 2 years older than him. And so he was 80 and she was 82. She eventually moved in with him to his house in San Jose, California. And Again, he had been living there for about 50 years, and he was only 2 blocks away from Adele's daughter's home, Karen Navarra. They had a pretty happy marriage for about 10 years. When Tony Aiello was entering his 90s. I'm amazed to learn about this love stories. The guy was 80, now he's in his 90s. He was an interesting guy. He had fake teeth, an artificial hip. And I'm not trying to, be shady about this guy, but I just want you to picture him in your head. He had an artificial hip, an artificial knee, fake teeth. He used a walker to hoist himself out of bed. He was stiff in the back. He had contraptions to help him pull on his pants and socks, along with a shoehorn to slide his feet into Velcro strapped shoes. That's not all. He had hearing aids and a pacemaker with a defibrillator for his triple bypassed heart. He would read recipes in the living room and forget the ingredients by the time he reached the kitchen. Well, listen, you are okay. I do the same. And my dining table is in the kitchen. But this guy also had arthritis that stiffened the fingers that had served him for decades as a deli butcher. So he cut food with scissors instead of with knives. He took blood thinners for his congestive heart failure. And the slightest nick while pruning trees in the yard would make him bleed until his wife Adele would, as he put it, patch him up. He also lost an inch or so to age, so he was only 4'11". Now you have a picture, right? You can see Tony right now. Okay. Again, he was very happy with his wife Adele for 10 years, but everything changed on September 14th, 2018. When the police went to their home to let them know, they found Karen dead in her own home. She'd been murdered. Now, apparently, it all started with Karen's job. They didn't notice that she was missing. Karen was 67 years old, and she was a pharmacy technician, and not only very good at her job, but she was also very responsible. So when she missed a day of work, her friend and co-worker decided to go check on her. When she got there, the door wasn't locked. Karen was sitting on a chair with a knife in her hand and with serious wounds across her head and neck. There was pizza on the kitchen counter and on the floor. She called the police, and they just couldn't make sense of the scene. The knife really suggested that she did it to herself, but there were signs of struggle. So which one is it? The coroner ruled it a homicide from the get-go, though. So they concluded that somebody was trying to cover it up by setting up the knife in her hand. They go to Karen's family, Tony and Adele. And Adele remembered and told the police that Karen had mentioned a guy who seemed to be watching her from the other side of the street, and that Karen was afraid of him. Tony admitted that he visited Karen that day, September the 8th, and that he brought her pizza and biscotti, and that she mentioned that she was going to go out with friends. The police wonder, is it one friend or is it friends? He couldn't remember. But remember, he's an old guy, so he can definitely could have forgotten precisely what she said. Then he also said that he remembers seeing Karen drive by his house with a guy that he didn't recognize. The police, of course, go through surveillance cameras, and there was one. I'm assuming that it was one of those, what is it called? Ring? I can't think of the name. Those cameras that you have on your bell outside the door, so you can see who is ringing the bell. And one of them was kind of pointing at her driveway because that's the way that the house was positioned. And they quickly realized that Tony lied because Karen never left her house that day. So she couldn't have, went by his house. She couldn't have, it didn't make sense what he was saying, okay? She never left, so it was impossible that she drove by his house with this guy. So the unknown man was nothing. And what they did find was footage of a Toyota parked in her driveway between 3:12 and 3:30 p.m. The police never told Adele or Tony about Karen wearing a FitBit. But when they looked into it, they found out that Karen died while Tony was visiting her because that Toyota was his. It was recorded in this device that her heart rate accelerated and then decreased sharply. At 3:28 p.m., the heart stopped. So now Tony was not only the stepfather, but also the prime suspect. So they asked him to go to the station with them. The investigator asked him if he knew what a FitBit was, and that is when they explained to him that it stopped at 3:28 p.m., that her heart stopped at that time, and that there's proof that he was inside the house. He tried to deny it, saying that somebody else must have been inside the house. But really, this information was enough to charge him. His defense was that, the FitBit information is not reliable, and that basically that was the whole argument. They searched his house, and to make things worse for him, they found pants, a tank top, and a shirt with blood stains. Traces of blood in the sink, and later confirmed that this blood that they found in this clothing was Karen's blood. So he could say that FitBit was lying, but really it didn't matter because they had physical evidence. The police tried to find a motive, really, but he wouldn't say. He had to be transferred several times between the jail infirmary to a hospital. If I'm not mistaken, over a dozen times. And he eventually died on September 10th, 2019, so 4 days before the year anniversary. And so he died before he could stand trial. So eventually, the charges were dismissed. Isn't it interesting, though, that I don't think that they would have come to the conclusion that he had something to do with it if it wasn't because they knew exactly at what time her heart stopped. And how this FitBit was used as a black box to store data about the person that was using it. And yeah, they would have checked, I'm assuming, the cameras around to see if, who went, but they could have just not put things together and assume, since he said that he was at her place that day, they could have assumed, okay, he left and then that happened. But really, this FitBit stored enough data to point to this very, very bizarre murderer. I'm assuming that the guy died because, he was older and very, very sick. But I think that he had a way to keep himself okay, and that his wife, having everything that he needed to do everyday activities with the help of all these devices and things he needed to actually live somewhat normal life. I'm not saying that as he was, spending time in jail, that he didn't get what he needed. Not saying that. All I'm saying is that it would only make sense to understand that he was not tend to as he was when he was at home. I don't know if the police would have come up with the idea that he was actually capable of murder. I am not going as far as to say that he was not capable of murder, but I don't think I would have thought that he was capable of overpowering, her. You would think that even being an older woman, that she'd be stronger than this very fragile man. But it points to the idea that evil really exists, and that no matter how hard we try to make this image in our head of what a serial killer or a murderer looks like, and maybe when you think about a serial killer, or when you think about a murderer, you think about Richard Ramirez, or Ted Bundy, or I think we have a pretty clear image of a strong guy, younger or fit, and or a very smart girl with the means of debilitating the person that they're trying to murder. So, in this case, how a 90-year-old man overpowered her, I think it's simple. It's plain evil. I've come to the conclusion, to kind of spoil that video that I mentioned or that episode that I mentioned in the beginning, I came to the conclusion that as much as I hate to know this or to accept this, because I really cannot prove it, but I do think that some people are born evil. I don't think I can look into a child's eye and say, you will be a serial killer. Or I don't think I can see a child in the hospital and say, you're going to torture people. But I do think that some people are born with that extra that maybe not everyone has. Extra darkness. And under the right conditions and under the right circumstances, upbringings, it triggers. In my head, I think it triggers that darkness that overpowers the rest of them. And again, I'm going to do a full episode about that and my conclusions after almost 3 years of researching cases. And I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist or law enforcement, but I like to think that I am able to make connections with things, and I've made enough connections to understand that in my head, it would make sense that some people are born with extra darkness. I don't want to call it evil. And that's why we hear about these cases that, a guy like this, living for 90 years in this world, a peaceful and boring life, snaps and kills his stepdaughter. Something triggered the darkness in him. And I think that's why some people in their 90s, some other ones since they're young, maybe kids, teenagers, adults. I think there's a time when that darkness is let loose, not because they choose to, but because of something that triggers it. Because that would be the only explanation that it would make sense in my head as a human being, that a guy that stayed out of trouble his entire life could kill his stepdaughter in the horrible way that he did it. Overpowered a younger woman, a sick and old man. I think there must be some kind of a evil force that takes over their bodies. Maybe that darkness that I've been talking about. And again, I'm not an expert. I just think that I am the kind of person who can make connections, and based on those connections come up with conclusions in my head, and you don't have to agree with me. But I would love for you to share with me 2 things. If you're watching this on YouTube, please take the time to let me know. Do you own a FitBit? Are you against, I guess 3 questions. Are you against the police using that information? Maybe if you're the criminal, but if you were a victim, would you be opposed to that? And number 2, do you believe that people can be born with that darkness? Or can somebody be born evil? Or you believe that we're all innocent and we become something different? I would love to know your theory. That would add some extra to my planned episode about people being born evil or not, and some cases and examples that I want to share with you. So please don't leave without sharing that with me. I would really appreciate if you do. And I hope you understand that once again, this is not a conspiracy theory. This is how technology has been used today to solve crimes. And I think that from here, we're going to see more and more technology. And for some people, that's a very scary thing. So once again, thank you for being here in the theory. The theory? I guess I just dropped the mystery because at this point, I think I got it in my head. So is the theory channel not more mystery? Okay, you're born evil, period. That's the end. Sure, why not? But thank you so much for being here in the Mystery Theory. I appreciate you coming back every week for more. I enjoy reading your comments, your theories, and everything that you think. It adds so much more to my thoughts on different things, true crime related. Thank you so much for being here today, guys, and I'll talk to you guys next time. If you're on YouTube, remember to come back for Wednesday. Bye, guys.